Assalamu alaikum. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Shukran jazilan. Thank you very much for your patience. And sorry for the inconvenience of the technology. Technology gives us advantages and disadvantages. So we're going to resort to the old way. I'm going to speak and draw on the board and use my hands until we fix the data show. Okay? So we're going to improvise. And you have to use your imagination because you don't have a picture, right? So you're going to have to use your imagination. I'm going to be speaking in English. I can speak Arabic, but because the majority, I think the common language amongst us is English, so I'll speak English. I don't know German, I'm sorry. I'm learning, but not enough to give a talk about science. I'm going to first introduce myself. My name is Rana Dajani. I'm a professor of molecular biology from the Hashemite University in Jordan. Currently, I'm in Berlin, and I'm at the Robert Bosch Academy pursuing a research project trying to identify societal patterns and how they can be reflected at the cellular level. But that's another topic for another day. I'm here today to talk about the epigenetics of trauma, and I'll explain what that means. But I'd like to talk about myself and introduce myself by saying that I wear 5 hats. Because I play 5 roles in my life. People talk about, when you do something, they talk about your hats, your different hats. I don't wear a hat, I wear a scarf. So I talk about my 5 scarves. So the first role I play, or the first scarf I wear, is that I'm a mother. Or in other words, I'm a parent. And to me, that's the most important role I think I play, and I think any human being can play. Because bringing up the next generation is the most important thing we can give to humanity. I have 4 children, they're all grown up now, but to me that's the most important role. And I always talk about it wherever I am. And by the way, the talk I'm going to give you is a talk I gave at Max Planck 2 weeks ago, so it's the same. The second scarf that I wear is that I'm a teacher, I'm an educator. I was a school teacher for 10 years. I taught from 1st grade to 12th grade, biology and science. And even now at the university, I'm still a teacher. And the second most important role any human being can play is being a teacher. Because our children, if they're not at home, they're at school. And so the teacher is very important because she or he forms the minds and the mindsets and the personalities of our children. So if we want to contribute to the next generation, the best way to do it is by being a teacher. And all of you who live here in Germany, one very important way for you to contribute to society and to who we are and to humanity is when you pursue a job of being a teacher. And I urge you to do that because then you represent your community in the school, which helps bring pride to the children who come from your community, but also it helps in changing mindsets of those who are not from your community to appreciate who you are. Because I'm sure every one of you remembers their teacher. Because the teacher, either a bad teacher or a good teacher, you will never forget them. So that's a very important role. The third role or scarf that I wear is I'm a scientist. I love science. I get a kick and a thrill from trying to understand how molecules combine and bind and how cells connect and talk to each other. And in that context, my lab is an world expert in 2 fields. The first one is we're the world experts on 2 ethnic populations in Jordan. One is called the Circassians and the other is called the Chechens. I don't know if you're familiar with them. They come from southern Russia and they actually were expelled from Russia. They were persecuted for their religion as Muslims back 150 years ago. And they were either they were exiled to Siberia or they were killed, or many fled to other countries like Turkey, Jordan, Palestine, Egypt, even as far as New Jersey. So I study them, and we're the world experts on understanding their genetics. We have a DNA database for them, and everyone around the world comes to us to study those 2 populations. And we've published in Nature, which is like the #1 publication any scientist dreams of publishing in, on our work with them. Of course with others, because no science can be done by one person or one lab. It's about teamwork all across the world. The second field of research that I pursue is the topic of our talk today, which I'll talk about in a minute after I finish introducing myself. Ah, okay, good. My fourth scarf, or my fourth roll, perfect. My fourth roll, 1, 2, 3, those are my rolls. My fourth role is I'm a social innovator. I started a program called We Love Reading. We Love Reading. It's on my label here. And it's a program that encourages children to fall in love with reading. And it's about changing mindsets through reading to nurture change makers. And I'll also talk about it in my work today as I go through my lecture. Then my fifth scarf, I'm not going to tell you what my fifth scarf is. I'm going to invite you to read my book. So I wrote a book called, guess what? 5 Scarves. And in it, I'll explain my fifth role. And the book it is in English and in Arabic. I can give you the English version for free on a PDF. So in the end of my talk, I'll have my email up there. Take a picture of the email, copy it, and then email me, and I'll send you the PDF so you can read it. Don't buy it; it's too expensive. The Arabic one, actually, you can buy it. It's only $9, less than €9, right? $9, €7, something like that. So it's affordable if you want to read the Arabic version. It was reviewed in Nature, and you'll read about it. And that's the Arabic one. Nawshih al-Khamsa. So I'm going to tell you a number of stories. And the reason I choose to tell stories is because storytelling is very important. And because I study biology and I study humans, I believe that as humans evolved, there were 2 groups of people. There were a group of people who told stories and sat around the fire. And there was another group of people who looked at those who were telling stories and frowned upon them and accused them of wasting their time. But can you imagine which one of those groups survived? Was it the storytellers or the ones who were against storytelling? Who do you think? It was the storytellers, of course. We learn through stories. We love stories. We watch movies, we read books. And the Quran and all the other holy books are all full of stories because we learn through stories. So in the spirit of storytelling, I'm going to tell you a number of stories. And I always use this quote, which says, seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought. And this is a famous quote by a Nobel Prize winner in physics. I'm not going to tell you his name. You have to check it out. I'm a teacher, so I have to give you homework. So you check it out who he is. And I'm going to use it all the way, but I don't think it's just scientists who see what everybody sees, but think what no one has thought. It's also people, human beings. That's how we survived. All right? Good. Now, my name, I said, is Rana Dajani. So my family is Dajani family. And the Dajani family lived in Jerusalem, in West Jerusalem, since the 11th century. So a long time ago, centuries ago. And this is our neighborhood where we live. And this is a picture that was taken in 1942 of the family. Of course, in 1948, my father was 5 and he was expelled by Zionist forces from Jerusalem, and then he went to Lebanon. And we haven't been able to go back since, because that's what is today Israel. It's part of Israel. But, and that was the Nakba that happened. And today it's happening again, as we know, in Gaza. So when I study trauma, and people in the West study trauma, and they talk about trauma and then post-trauma, I say, what's post-trauma? Our trauma has not stopped. Our trauma has been going on for 75 years, right? And counting. So this concept of perceiving trauma as one event, and then we're going to study what happens after, doesn't work. It's not practical. It's not real. And so as I started studying trauma, especially not just because of being from Palestine, but also because being from Syria, my mother is half Syrian, and talking about the Syrian crisis. But because of my work, I'm part of a network called Rights for Time, which works on trying to understand trauma in the context of time, in a longitudinal context of time, not just an acute crisis that happens once and that's it. And usually in the West, when they come and they claim wars and come and do wars on us, and then they go back home, to them it's one trauma. And then they talk about post-trauma. But for us, it's continuous. And actually, we work with a mental health center in Gaza, which is called the mental health programming, which unfortunately, the whole building was destroyed in the recent events, and many people have been killed. Allah yarhamhum. And actually, I'm sure you recognize this gentleman. Khalid and his granddaughter. So he was one of the people we worked with in this mental health center. And mashallah alayh, yani after what happened with him and the whole center was destroyed, he was going around helping people, talking about resilience, sumud, and how to stay and how to use our faith and our strength to keep on going forward. So there are so many lessons we can learn from our own heritage, our own culture, on how, and our own religion, how to deal with trauma going forward, that can help inform this research, the science, interventions all over the world. And so taking a step back and talking about my other half, like I said, my mother's from Aleppo, she's Syrian, and also when the Syrian crisis happened in 2011, many Syrian refugees came to Jordan. And many of them, whether from Palestine, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, you name it, half of the refugees are children. And so we were interested as scientists to study the impact of trauma on children. And being in Jordan, where I work, we were looking at the Syrian refugee children then. What happened is that we had an international NGO that had an intervention, a program, to help adolescent children to deal with their trauma. This program was called the Nubadir, and it was an 8-week program that the teenagers would enroll in, and they would learn something, sports, computer science, a barber, weaving, something. And the assumption or the claim by this international NGO was that this intervention would help the children reduce their stress and anxiety and improve their resilience. So me and my partners from Yale University, we went in to actually assess the impact of this intervention. And we were neutral, we were a third party, so we're not the intervention, we're not the international NGO, but we were a third party to study it. So first of all, we went in to study the mental health of these children. And in order to study mental health, we assessed the children before and then after the intervention, and then a year after, to make sure if the changes on the children were sustainable. Okay? So we first did the evaluation on the mental health and the behavior. Now, this is not my field. I'm a biologist. I work on biomarkers. I don't work on mental health, but I learned a lot from my colleagues who work on mental health. So they had these surveys that measure human insecurity, human distress, perceived stress. SDQ is also about stress. And AYMH is an acronym for also stress and anxiety. So all these surveys were done on the children, assessing their stress. And we found out that, yes, indeed, the stress and anxiety of these children as a result of this intervention went down. So that was good. However, when my team was doing this assessment, they told me, we sit with the kids and we ask them these questions, and these are really traumatizing questions because it asks the kids like, who did you see tortured in front of you? How do you, how bad do you feel? So the kids were actually traumatized from the survey itself. So my staff, or my team, who is also Syrian Jordanian, because I don't allow people who are not Syrian Jordanian from the community to do the assessment, said, can we introduce something positive? And this is because they care. It's their community. They're not like going studying someone else. And that's very important. That anybody who should assess a community should be from the same community. And so we said, yeah, that's a great idea. So we thought, why don't we introduce another tool, another survey that measures resilience. Resilience يعني الصمود أو الصمود. And so we developed a survey that measured resilience. This data was published. If anyone wants to read about it, you can find it online. But then, so we produced a survey about resilience, and we measured resilience in the children. And we published this new tool that was tailored for the community. So it wasn't a Western tool. It was a culturally appropriate tool from our same community. And what did we find? We found out that although the program claimed that the intervention increased resilience, using this survey, we showed that it didn't. Yes, it reduced stress, but it didn't improve resilience. And the reason is because the program, the intervention that was developed, was based on a Western concept and framework of resilience, which was based on the fact that resilience in their context, in the Western context, is built around an individual. So the whole program was about 8 weeks working with the youth. And we found out that resilience in our communities, in the Arab communities, is based on family and community coming together. And no wonder the resilience did not improve in these kids, because the intervention had nothing to do with the family or the community. So in a way, this was good for the intervention to change and to include in its next iteration a component that had to do with the family and the community, so that they could really help boost resilience in this community. And of course, Science, which is the second most important journal in science, it's called Science, published a special edition about our work and what we did. But I'm a biologist. To me, all these surveys, I was very suspicious of them, because you could fill a survey and say, yeah, I'm feeling good or I'm feeling bad, but it's very subjective to how you're feeling that day. Does it really tell us what's going on inside our body? Not necessarily. So I thought we want to study what's happening under the skin, because your body doesn't lie. And in order to do that, we used biomarkers. Oh, by the way, two things. Every time you see that magnifying glass, I'm using the quote, seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought, okay? So the body doesn't lie, and we wanted to go in and look at biomarkers. So we chose to look at cortisol. Cortisol is a hormone that we secrete in our body when we're stressed. Okay? So when you're stressed, your hormone cortisol goes up. And when it goes up, it's actually in your blood, it's in your saliva, it even deposits in your hair. Okay? It actually deposits in your hair. So when we wanted to do this, and we were telling the international NGO Mercy Corps that we're going to evaluate biomarkers, and actually we're going to look at cortisol, they told us, oh my God, don't do that, because then everybody will think that we're coming to make experiments on the kids. And I said, yeah, of course, because you're the ajanib, and you feel already guilty because you're going in. Why would they feel that if this is all about science? So, and I said, of course, you're not doing the evaluation. We are, the third party. So I went in and talked to all the parents and the kids, and I explained to them what I just told you, that a survey may not really reflect what's happening, but your body doesn't lie. And I told them we look at science, and science is neutral, and science says cortisol is one indicator. And I told them there's three ways we can take a sample. We can take blood, we can take saliva, or we can take hair. So we discussed it with them, with the kids and their parents. Should we do blood? Oh, no, blood, you put a needle, it's messy, it's scary, forget about blood. Okay, shall we do saliva? We tried. But saliva, it's really messy. You have to spit into a little tube, fill the tube, and you can't eat for half an hour before that. So that's difficult with kids. So we thought, let's do hair. And some people were saying, no, nobody's going to let you do hair. But then the parents said, yeah, of course, we'll bring a barber for the men and one for the women. We'll have free haircuts for everybody, and we'll take a sample of hair. So they actually solved the problem. And why cortisol? This shows us what happens. When you get a trauma, your cortisol goes up. And then it goes down. But if you have another trauma, it goes up again, and so on. And actually, in extreme trauma, your cortisol goes way down. That's very extreme trauma. It's too many times stimulated. But it's a good indicator. So we actually take a sample of hair. So as long as every month, your hair grows 1 centimeter, and so you have a history of how stressed you are as long as your hair is. So as long as your hair, I can go back in time and see how stressed you were. Which is really fantastic, right? Very cool. But you know what happened? All the boys, when we wanted to take the sample, before the program started, they all thought, oh, this is a program. So they all went and had a haircut. And then they came and said, oh my God, so we had to stop and say, go grow your hair and then come back and then we can stop the program. We learned. Anyway, so you take just like the top of you only take from the back of your head just this much of hair, and you don't take it off the roots. You just cut right at the level of the scalp of your head, and then you can measure how much cortisol. And we were able to show that indeed, compared to controls, of course, we had a group who was control, who did not take the program, and a group who took the program, and we showed over time cortisol did go down because of the program. All right, so we correlated the surveys with actual biomarkers inside from these children. And we went back and showed the children the data, right? And that's very important. Most researchers don't do that. And it was so cool because the kids got to understand the science and got to see the results. And it gave them agency because we told them, we want to evaluate if this program really works or not. Because if it doesn't work, we're going to help them make it work better. So this is very important to bring the community together and give them agency and ownership that we want to evaluate. We're not just sitting there and people bringing us programs for what they think is right. So that was very important. And this is acknowledgement of all the teams that worked with us in order to produce that data that I showed you. And that was all published, of course. And actually a movie was made about our work called Terror and Hope. And this is available for universities and schools. If anybody's interested to watch the movie, you can screen it, show it. And it's all about our work with the Syrian and Jordanian children, because the Jordanians were the control as well, not just the Syrians. Yeah, take a picture. And it won actually a few awards, which I'm very proud of. But to me, as a biologist, that wasn't enough either, right? Because I wanted to see more. Again, seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought. I wanted to see, do the effects of war, displacement, or interventions, how do they affect not just our physiology, not just our brain or mental health, not just our physiology by looking at, for example, cortisol, but does it affect our DNA? Okay, so that was my next question. And what do I mean by DNA? So we know that the way we present ourselves to the world, which we call phenotype, which is that purple word in the middle, how you manifest in the world, is a combination of two main things. It's your genetics, what you inherit from your parents, and it's the environment you interact with. All right, so it's a combination of both. And that's what you present to the world. So I wanted to see war, displacement is environment. Can that impact our DNA? Or interventions and programs, does that impact our DNA? That impact on the DNA is what we call epigenetics. So it doesn't change your DNA, but it changes the turning on or off of genes. Okay, so what does that mean? In other words, I'll explain it in a different way. The cells in your body can sense the environment around them. As we see here in this cartoon, they can hear. They don't literally hear, but they can sense it. And as our cells respond to the environment, either there's a fast response, so the cell crawls somewhere or shrinks or does something, but there are also long-term responses by changes, as I said, in what genes are turned on or off inside the nucleus of the cell. And that's what we call epigenetics. So this is your DNA, which usually is folded into what you can see under a microscope as a chromosome, okay? And the DNA, the purple thing, is folded around proteins. So it's easier to unfold and fold. You know, it's like when you have wool, yarn, when you're doing wool. It's easier to wrap it around something, right? And so your DNA, because it's very long, is wrapped around these proteins. And so if you have changes on the DNA, it can either make it wrap more tight or less tight. All right? So these changes on the DNA that come from the outside will make your DNA wrap tighter or less. If it's wrapped tighter, then you can't use that DNA. Okay? It's not accessible. If it's wrapped loosely, that means it's open and you can use it. So the changes of the environment don't change your DNA. They change only if it's accessible or not accessible. All right? Or in other words, if the gene is turned on or turned off. What does that mean? Let me make it easier. So we've done a lot of experiments in mice. And in mice, for example, if you take a baby mouse, we call it a pup, and these are identical, right? Everything, their DNA is the same. What we're changing is the environment. So in one case, if the mouse has a mom who takes care of it, and you know mice, how the mom mouse takes care of its baby mouse by licking it. It licks it and takes care of it. So if it does, that mouse grows up to be like its mother, calm and nurturing and loving. The other mouse, if its mom doesn't take care of it, doesn't lick it, leaves it, doesn't interact with it, the pup mouse grows up to be the same as the mom, not caring, anxious all the time and stressed. Why? So in the brain of the mouse, we have cells that have on them the receptor for cortisol, the hormone I told you about. So when the mouse is stressed, its cortisol goes up. Okay? And then what happens in the cells of the brain, there are receptors that take the cortisol and take it into the cell. So what happens to the cortisol in the blood? It goes down. That's the normal way. Now, if your gene for the receptor is turned off, then you don't have the receptor. So when you're scared, your cortisol goes up and it stays up because you don't have the receptor to take it in. Okay? If your receptor gene is turned on, then you have the receptor. Then when the cortisol goes up, you take it in and you go back to normal. Okay? So for the mouse whose mom took care of it, the gene is turned on, the receptor is there. When the cortisol goes up, it goes in. For the other mouse whose mom didn't take care of it, the gene is turned off, so you don't have the receptor, the cortisol stays high, and you're always anxious and looking around you. Okay? This is epigenetics. So the environment impacting your DNA. Now, there's an evolutionary advantage to this. This is not like for no reason, because apparently if a mom is not taking care of its child, the baby pup, mouse, because she's in an environment that's not safe, she's worried. And so you would assume that the pup is going to grow up in the same environment, so they also have to be always alert. But if the mother is living in a comfortable environment, then the baby will live in that same environment. That's the assumption. And the question was, can you reverse that? And yes, you can. In a mouse, you can actually inject a chemical and take off the methylation group that was on the DNA, so you make the DNA accessible again. And so now the mouse can actually make the gene is turned on, you can make the receptor for cortisol, so if cortisol goes up, you can take it in and it goes down again, okay? So you can actually reverse it in the chemical. Now, all this is in mice. we are similar to mice, we're mammals. There are many things similar between us, so the assumption is that we have the same behavior, the same mechanism. But we can't test such an experiment in mice. I can't just inject a chemical in you and see what happens. First of all, I need a control group. And second, we don't know what this chemical will do to other things in your body, right? But in principle, we know that we expect it happens in humans. So if you look at humans, you start with, every one of us started as one cell, as a zygote, a fertilized egg. And then what happens? It grows, it divides, and becomes a fetus in the womb of the mother. And then you're born, you're a child, you grow up, you're a teenager, and then you become an old person. Now, throughout your life, your genome, your DNA doesn't change. It doesn't. What changes is your epigenome, right? How the environment impacts you. And those things turn on and off, depending on your environment. Your environment in your mom's womb, your environment when you're born, your environment as you grow up, your environment as an old person. So, that means every word I'm saying is changing you, right? So, you can stop listening and go if you want. So this is me giving you a disclaimer. Do you understand? All right? So I'm not responsible. If you change now, a gene turns on or off, it's not my responsibility. I've told you, okay? All right, so that's the epigenome. So we were interested to understand what does that mean, right? So, for example, what are the determinants of health? Because as you grow from early life to midlife to late life, you are exposed to a number of diseases that could develop. What impacts you developing those diseases is based on either your socioeconomic components, like your socioeconomic, like how much money you earn, how much education, what are you exposed to, do you smoke or not, what do you eat, and how that impacts your DNA, your epigenetics, okay? And we wanted to look at this in a positive way, not in a negative way. And this is new, because usually in the past, the way the West has been, because mostly the West is studying science more than us, we always follow, they've always given it a negative perspective, that if you're exposed to trauma, that means you're always going to respond negatively. It's always going to be negative. But then recently, a few years ago, me and others, we came up with an idea, but why negative? As humans, we have survived over a long time. And we've been having, fights and wars and stuff like that. But we survive. Can we look at it in a positive way? Meaning, instead of saying how we become worse, can we look at how we thrive, how we survive, how we flourish? And so instead of treating us as victims, to treat us with dignity, with respect, with people who take ownership. And this idea was proposed like a few years ago. Can we look at the epigenetics of resilience rather than the epigenetics of the negative, of trauma? And so what does this mean? In a sense, in order to do that, we took the way to measure epigenetics is there's this new, kind of relatively new, epigenetic clock. All right, this was developed by Michael Kober from British Columbia and Vancouver. So this is an epigenetic clock, meaning it measures how much changes on your DNA happened as a result of aging. Okay, so as we age, we have changes in our DNA. And the idea or the concept behind it, that if you're exposed to trauma, this aging gets accelerated. Okay? So the first question was, how does your environment impact your clock? And second, can those changes be reversed through interventions? And then how long do those changes stay? All right, how sustainable? Do they stay for 1 year, 2 years, forever? So those are the questions that today the field of epigenetics is interested in. And that's what we were interested to study. But we also wanted to ask another question, which was, those changes that happens in your DNA, can they be transferred across generations? So can I transfer it to my child and my grandchild? So how long do they stay? Really, how, not just within my lifetime, but can I give them to the next generation? Now, we know in animals it does happen. So if a mouse is exposed to trauma, you can find the same pattern, the epigenetic changes, genes turned on and off in the feet, in the next generation. And actually up to 4 generations in mice. So you expect the same thing in humans, but nobody had actually done it up till now. But we did, and I'll show you. So we wanted to see it in humans, right? We know it happens in animals and mammals like us, so we expect it to happen to humans. So the thesis that we wanted to test was, if a mother, she's the first generation, if she's exposed to environment, in this example, like smoking, for example, will that impact the baby? That's the first generation. And will it impact the second generation, meaning the reproductive cells inside the baby? Okay? Or this is a better example. So the mother's in white, the baby's red, and the baby of the baby is blue. So if the baby's born, she grows up and she has her baby who's blue, and then you have the blue. So you have 3 generations. So the question is, if the grandmother is exposed to trauma, will you see that signature in the 3rd generation? And actually, we were able to do that. We are the first to do it in the world. We just submitted our paper for publication. This was done by a group of scientists from my lab, Yale University, Hawaii University, and Florida. And we were able to show, just to go back to the picture, what we did is we took, I don't think I put the slides, yeah, because it's too complicated, and it's new, we haven't published it yet. But what we showed, we took, and this is why couldn't we do it in humans? Because you can't do it in humans. You can't take a group of humans and say, I'm going to give you trauma, and I'm not going to give you trauma, and then I'm going to follow you for 3 generations, which is like, I don't know how long, for 40 years or something, and then test you. So the only way we could do it is by going backwards. So because I told you my mother is Syrian, and I don't know how many are familiar, in 1980 there was a big massacre in the city of Hama in Syria, in 1980. So we went back to those grandmothers now, who were pregnant in 1980 when that happened. And we took from them samples, and we took samples from their daughters and their granddaughters. Okay? And then we took another group who were not exposed to trauma, but their daughters were exposed in 2011 in the second crisis. And then we saw a third example, cohort where nobody was exposed to trauma. So we were able to find the right experiment, the right design, because we know the community and because the community trusted us. And we explained why we're doing this. And we explained that this doesn't mean we're going to find a solution, but this is part, science is about building a building. You add little pieces one by one, one block by one block. So by them contributing to this experiment, they would be contributing to science for the future. And they all accepted because they understood what it was about. And we were able to show that, yes, those grandmothers that were exposed to trauma passed on to their granddaughters a special pattern. There were like 14 genes that were turned on in a particular way. Now, what do those genes do? We don't know yet. Nobody knows. We know that there's something happening, and we know it's real. But we don't know what does it mean. And that's why we wanted to put on it a positive frame, not a negative frame. We didn't want to say those genes that means whoever inherits that change is going to be negative and bad. We want to say there's a change. And can we say this change is positive? Can we say it's about resilience? It's about being positive. It's about flourishing. Instead of it's negative and it's bad. because that's an attitude that makes some to victimize people rather than celebrate people and give them dignity. And that's the difference. So that's the research that we are doing, and that's my lab that's doing it. And that's why my daughter, I involve my children in all my research. My daughter calls it the immortal kiss of our grandparents. That stays forever. So the other thing that we were interested in, remember I told you to look at interventions. So we know that trauma or something in your environment changes your DNA. And we know that it gets transferred across generations. The question that we didn't answer is, can an intervention change it? Can it reverse it? So we wanted to look at interventions. So I had started my own intervention. We love reading, that I told you about. So we love reading, as I said, is about changing mindsets through reading to nurture change makers. So what it does is that it trains women, men, and youth from age 16 to 100 why reading for fun is important, how to read aloud to make it fun for the children, and how to start a reading session in your neighborhood. And the conditions are that you read in your native language. That's very important. And you have to read in a public space so all the children can come. And you are free to choose when and where and how, because you know your community better than anyone else. So there's this ownership, this agency that the person who took the training takes. And the person who takes the training is a volunteer. Nobody pays them. They do it because they want to, not because they have to. And they own it. So nobody in the community knows about me or who started the program. They only know the person who is reading in the neighborhood. Maryam, John, Mary, Yusuf. So they get all the credit from the community. And that's what keeps them doing it even years after the training. And that's why We Love Reading is very successful. So what happens is you read aloud to the children, then they line up and you give them the books to take home. So they start reading, they start begging their parents to read to them. So we flipped the equation. Rather than the parents begging their children to come, now it's the other way around. The children begging their parents to read to them, or they start reading to their siblings and their friends. And so this puts the horse before the cart, meaning the children start loving to read and therefore loving to learn, and they become lifelong readers and lifelong learners. And that's the whole goal of the program. But as the program progressed, we realized that the program was not only about reading for early childhood and so on. We realized because it's reading a real book in real time, that it improved the mental health of the children, right? So because somebody is looking with them, reading with them, being with them. And so the We Love Reading program was not only a program for learning, it became a program for mental health for the children, building resilience and reducing stress. And then as we were talking, we won multiple awards, and as we shared the program, somebody said, but Rana, your program is also about adults, because the women and men and youth who are reading aloud to the children themselves, it helped their mental health, because suddenly they had a purpose, they had a reason, they owned this program, they were getting all the credit, because they were thinking, if I read to the children, I'm changing the children's lives, what else can I change in my community? So they became leaders in their own right. So We Love Reading became a program for adults for mental health, and a program for adults for leadership and social innovation, and becoming social entrepreneurs. So We Love Reading is innovative because it has the secret sauce. The secret sauce is you do things because you want to, not because you have to. And that is so, so important. It's a very slight change, but it means the whole world. When somebody tells you have to do this, you don't do it. But if you do it because you want to, then you do it. The second reason is because it's based on shared universal values, children and loving to read and education, but like DNA, everybody has the same DNA, but it's unique in the sense you read in your own language, you choose the place, you choose the time, you choose the date, it's your program. You own it. So this balance between unity and diversity, which reflects nature, is what made the program actually spread to 69 countries around the world today. And we use technology in a way that serves us. We don't serve technology. So we don't use digital books for the children. We read real books, and we've developed our own. But we use technology to connect the We Love Reading ambassadors around the world. All right, so for the adults to connect, to share successes, to share challenges, resources, and to help each other. As I said, these are some statistics. We are in 69 countries. We've trained over 8,000, almost 9,000 people, and how many books we've given out, and how many read-aloud sessions we've made. We've won multiple awards, and we've had partners from all over the world. And the Stanford Social Innovation Review wrote about us, the New York Times wrote about us, and Forbes, and many other journals. But most importantly, we wanted to do research on the program to see if it works or it doesn't, right? Especially, I'm a scientist. But I'm not a science of education, so I had to invite scientists from around the world who are in the field of education and psychology to study the program. So we first started by studying the children. So we did an assessment with Brown University looking at executive functions. And for those of you who are teachers, executive function is looking at working memory, emotional regulation, and inhibitory control. Those three things, if they improve, they are a testimonial that you will do better at school. And if you do better at school, that means you'll do better later in life. So we showed that the children who were engaged in We Love Reading improved on all three, and especially those who came from a lower socioeconomic status. So it's a way to jump your poverty gap. We also wanted to study emotional perception to see on the mental health of the children, especially children who are exposed to trauma, whether domestic or because of displacement or war. If you show them a series of faces, when they see the happy face, they actually see it as sad because of the trauma they've gone through. So after 3 months of We Love Reading, they went back to normal. And this was also published, we published this work and this research all our research, we published it in academic journals. But then we also wanted to say, how about we create children's books about particular themes and then measure the impact on children's behavior? So we created a whole series about the environment, about conservation of electricity, water, anti-littering, and then we measured their behavior before and after, and we showed that indeed all those behaviors changed as a result of just reading aloud stories. So this is a very zero-cost way of changing behavior. You don't need TV ads or posters. You just read aloud a good story to the children. We also wanted to see if the program impacted empathy, improved empathy, and we did. With the University of Chicago, we showed that in a control group compared to a control group, the children's empathy actually doubled. And actually, we created 33 children's books, and this is our latest book, which is about science. It's about a children's book about a little girl discovering science, and you can find all these books on our website. They're in Arabic, and some are in English. These are some pictures from the book about the peppered moth. So this came to so now I wanted to ask, can We Love Reading as an intervention impact epigenetics, impact the DNA? So we already studied behavior, right? We showed you in the behavior. So my question now, again, back to my biology, I wanted to ask the question, is the epigenetic clock, if it's accelerated because of some trauma, can it be de-accelerated through We Love Reading? And that's the experiment that we're actually doing now. We finished collecting the data, and we're analyzing right now to see, comparing two groups to each other, if the children who are part of We Love Reading, their epigenetics clock, if it's been accelerated, if we can de-accelerate it using We Love Reading. So stay tuned for next year, because this takes time. This will take at least a year or two to come out. But as I said, we had shown that the literacy actually improves in these children, right? So we showed that the literacy improved, their love of reading, their attitude towards reading, and it's sustainable over a year compared to the control group in red. But then we were interested to study the women and the men and the youth who were reading aloud to the children. So all that research was about the children. Now we wanted to study the adults, the ambassadors themselves, that we said their mental health improved, their leadership improved. So we started studying them, and we actually, a documentary was made about one of our ambassadors. Her name is Asma. She's a Syrian refugee. And this movie has won multiple awards. It was in the Berlin Film Award, it was in Copenhagen, it was in California, and actually it's going to be screened in Berlin on April 15. So if anybody's in Berlin on April 15, please come. And Asma is somebody I trained. She came from Syria in 2012, and she was in the Za'atari camp. In 2014, I trained her on We Love Reading. She started reading aloud to the children, and then she she discovered herself, right? She felt better, she felt important, she felt she was a leader. And then she started not just reading to the children, she started writing her own stories, she became a school teacher, and now she created her own program for youth, and she just won a big grant from UNHCR. Asma became a leader, and she's our example of how little changes can make huge differences. And that's why our motto is changing mindsets through reading to nurture change makers, because we believe everyone has it inside them as part of evolution, that they can make a difference. It's just that you need to trigger it. You need to kindle it, like give it a spark. And then we created a children's book to go with Asma's story, and it's called My Mama's Magic, or in Arabic, Mama al-Hakawatiyya. And we also did research on the women. So we took two groups of women, a group that went into We Love Reading and took the training and read aloud to the children, and a group that didn't. And we followed them over 3 time points. And we wanted to study, first of all, their social networks, and who are the people they talk to, and does that change with We Love Reading? And then we wanted to look at their volunteering attitudes. Does it increase because of We Love Reading? And we found that it does. And we published that work. And then we wanted to look at their empowerment, their life satisfaction, and their well-being. And we were able to show that their life satisfaction actually improved as a result of We Love Reading. So they felt better just by reading aloud to children. And we also, in this context, we looked at also empowerment. And we found that we were using a survey that was a Western survey, which we thought we had changed to become culturally adaptive. But when we did it, as you can see here, empowerment didn't change. Empowerment is the second one. Can you see it didn't change? Life satisfaction did. And I was surprised because I heard from the women their stories about empowerment, that they were doing much better. So how come it didn't show in the survey? Then we realized that the woman's perception of empowerment is different from what the survey was asking. The survey was done on a Western context, and what empowerment means from a Western perspective. But as women, Jordanian, Syrian, we perceive empowerment different. So we went back and we said, okay, we took a group of women and we talked to them, and we did something called fuzzy cognitive mapping, which is a new tool where you put 10 or 12 people together, and then you ask them, what does empowerment mean to you? Or what are the different definitions of empowerment? And then what are the factors that affect empowerment? And then you can draw a map. See that map? That shows empowerment and the different factors that affect it. And then from that, you can make a new survey that reflects the empowerment in the minds of those women. Then you can measure and say, yes, did We Love Reading change empowerment or not? And so this is another paper that we also sent for publication, and soon it will come out. So again, back to seeing what everybody sees, but thinking what no one has thought. So so this is the last part of my talk. And usually in this part, we do an exercise. I don't know how much time we have. We have time, right? ما في أذان هلا. المغرب لسه. Okay. So we're going to do an exercise by sharing with you. We do an exercise, which I think I left in the car, which I have to get from my bag. Just a second. Okay, I'm going to take questions, all right? Because we're going to do this exercise. But until we do the exercise, does anyone have any questions? That way we can keep on going and save time as we go. All right, questions? Yes. Yeah. So for the second question, did you hear the question? Yeah. So cortisol is only one marker. There are other markers. There are immune markers for the immune system that can be a reflection of stress, which we actually measured, and we showed they didn't change. All right, and usually if you do good science, if everything changes, that means there may be something wrong. But if some change and some don't, then it's more real. So cortisol changed, but the other one didn't change. So then we're okay. But there are other markers, of course. Now, your first question, as we said, this is the first time ever somebody has been able to show there's an epigenetic change as a result of a particular trauma that we were able to trace. All other research was only by association, not looking genetically, only looking at disease prevalence. So that's association, not causation. So again, this is all new. We don't know. We don't know those genes that were turned on or off that we showed. We don't even know what they do. right? So we don't know what's going to happen after. If we don't know what they do, we can't say if this is reversible or not. We'd have to keep looking. So all these are questions that people are working on right now. And hopefully if you keep track of the science, we'll able to answer them as we go. Inshallah. Yes. Okay. So we have these special chips. On them is the whole epigenome markers, right? So there's like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands. All right. So you put your DNA sample on it, and then you can measure which ones have changed compared to controls, and which ones haven't. And you do all the statistical analysis, all the probabilities, and we have many controls to make sure that these are real changes and not due to noise or something else. Okay, so the way the experiment happens is you take DNA samples from all of the people, like the first generation, second generation, third generation, okay? And then even in the third generation, we took 2 siblings to compare. And you put all these samples, and then you compare them through software, and you write software and it's computer modeling. And then you compare them all together with all the complicated statistics to make sure. If it's not about you don't say one parent had this and one parent had that. It's all about numbers and modeling. You can read the paper when it comes out. Because it's got, actually I could show you the data, but the problem is I sent my presentation to her laptop, so I can't show you. My laptop has the data and you can look at it, but it's all numbers. Good question. So per cohort, we had 20 families. So 20 families per cohort. We had 3 cohorts. So you had 60 families, and then in each family you have a grandmother, granddaughter, and 2 granddaughters. And then the granddaughters, you compare them. One was born before 2011, one was born after. So you can compare them to each other. And then you can compare exposed to unexposed. So you could compare a grandmother not exposed to one of the daughters who was not exposed. So we did multiple cross-sectional comparisons to make sure that these are real, as real as can be.
I have to read the paper.
Yeah, when it comes out, inshallah. Inshallah. Oh, he does. I know. In a good way, I hope. Yeah, we're on the side of the truth, whatever the truth is, right? We're not on the side of people. Right? We're on the side of the truth. Inshallah. Okay, we got my bag, so we can take a break, and then we'll come back to more questions. So I'm going to give you... Turn over the paper. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a few questions. My question is, raise your hand if you can see an old woman in the picture, in the image here on the screen. If you see an old woman, raise your hand very high. Only an old woman. Who can see only an old woman? Only an old woman. Only old. Who can see only an old woman? Okay, what's your name?
Sam.
Sammy? Sam? S-A-M. Sam. Okay. Sam can only see an old woman. Akid. We're sure. Okay. يعني بتحلف do you speak Arabic? Okay, I mean you're sure 100%. مين يحكي بالألماني يعني بتحلف يمين إنه it's an old woman. شو بالألماني بتحلف يمين؟ Old woman. He's sure. Okay. All right. Second question. Who can see only a young woman? Only a young woman. حلو. What's your name? Lena. تحلفي يمين؟ خلاص. Okay. طيب بالكم. So Lena and a group of you only can see a young woman. Sam and a group can only see an old woman. Who can see both? Okay, good. So, but Lena can only see a young woman, and Sam can only see an old woman. Lena and Sam disagree, right? You say it's all young. He says it's old, and you're both ready to stand by your opinion, right? And if we leave you you could actually disagree, and then maybe you'll have a fight, and maybe all your family will go fight his family, and then all your neighborhood will fight his neighborhood, and then all your country will fight his country, because you say it's a young woman, and he says, no, abadan, it's an old woman, right? Okay, but we know that both of you are right? We know that it's both young and old. So now let's help Lena and her people, and Sam and his people to see the other side. So let's look. Lena, you say it's a young woman. But this is an old woman too, because look, this is the chin of the old woman. This is the mouth of the old woman. That's the big nose of the old woman. Can you see her? Can you see her? Right. Sam, this is a young woman. This is her necklace. That's her chin. And up there, that's her ear. And that's her little nose and her eyelashes. Can you see the young woman? You can? Okay. So you can see both now. Okay. So can anyone still not see both? Oh, you still can't see both. You can't see the old woman. Sa'aduha, somebody help her. The old woman, that's her big nose, her chin, her mouth, her eye. Hayya 'ainha. Okay. Huh? You saw her? Okay. Fine. Now, what happened? I did an experiment on you. Let me tell you what I did. Come on, I took this from Stephen Conboy's book. But listen what happened. Stephen Conboy, 7 Habits of Highly Successful People. That's where he does. Usually you know this picture. This is a famous picture. It's an optical illusion. But what I did something special. I gave you, half of you took this picture, and half of you took the other one. What happened is I conditioned your brain. So those who had the young woman, I conditioned their brain. So when I showed them this one, the first thing they saw was the young. And those who took the old woman, I conditioned their brain so that when they saw this, the first thing, what do they see? The old woman. Then it takes time to see the other side. Yes?
Yeah, actually, I happen to have the old woman at first, but the only thing I could see
was the young one.
is the young one.
Oh, it's okay. There's always something different. Yeah. But in general, it works. Yeah. In general, those who saw the old woman will only see the old. Then it takes time to see the young. And those who got the young picture will see the young, and then it takes the old. Now, what's the goal of this? What's the lesson? The lesson is, how long did you look at these pictures? 30 seconds? 1 minute? Not more. Yet, what's your name? Wissam. Wissam, it took her a few minutes to see the other side. And Sam took him a few minutes, and we had to help him. We show him the chin and the eye and the ear. Imagine we grow up in an environment where we are told this is how the world looks. And we don't just look at it for 30 seconds. We look at it for minutes, for hours, for days, for weeks, for years. Then we encounter someone else who saw the world in a different way, right? And then we say, we're right and you're wrong. And that person says, no, I'm right and you're wrong. And maybe we're both right. And maybe we're not. That's okay. But this always reminds me, when I encounter someone who has a different opinion about something, that I respect. That doesn't mean I agree, but I respect that they have a different opinion because they grew up in a different environment than I am. And maybe they're right. Maybe. So I'm open to listen, to learn, and to respect. Because a lot of our problems comes because I am right and you are wrong. Well, no way. And every time I do this experiment, I have goosebumps, because it reminds me how quickly we can be distracted. And we think we're always right. And we should always be open to learn and to listen. And for the truth to be the guide for us, right? It's not about me, my ego, but to be open to listen and to learn. So I always do this experiment before any course I give my students, because I want to prepare us to be open and comfortable with ambiguity. And not, because as humans, we are on a spectrum. Some of us are comfortable with ambiguity, meaning things that we don't understand. And some are like, no, I need closure. I want to know what it is now. And many of us are in between. And some of that is genetics, and some of it is environment. So it's good to always ask ourselves and practice. And especially you, because you live in Germany. You come from a different community, a different ideology, and you're exposed to a different ideology. So it's not about right and wrong. It's about let's listen, let's talk, let's engage, let's have a dialogue. But that doesn't mean I agree, right? It means I'm open to listen. So from that, I'm going to end my talk by talking about how I see my role and our role as humans, and for me in particular as being a scientist. So whenever I give a talk, I talk about Rana as a scientist. I see my religion as a Muslim, that my religion, my upbringing actually invites me, encourages me, actually asks me to look around me and to observe and to think and to use my mind. Because my role in life is to take care of nature around me, take care of my fellow human beings. And that means that I use my mind to think, to reflect, to ask questions, and to be curious. And that's why many verses actually talk about that. And actually that's where the scientific method came from, by the way. It came from Islam, way long ago, not by the West. Because what does it say? Unzur, thumma unzur. Look, and then ask. And then if it doesn't work, look again. So that's about, you look, you make an observation, you think of an answer, which is a hypothesis, you test it. If it works, okay. If it doesn't, you go back, and what do? You look again. So that's the scientific method. So to me, that's what I draw from my religion. And then also I draw from my religion the encouragement to be curious, the encouragement to ask questions, and that there are no red lines for questions. And that's why when I read the Quran, I'm always excited to read it, to see what can I understand from it, what can I find that's new. Again, back to that magnifying glass, right? So I love this verse from Surah Al-Baqarah, and I'm paraphrasing here, okay? When Ibrahim asks Allah, show me how you can bring back the dead back to life. Okay, now who's asking? Ibrahim, يعني the number one prophet, صح? I mean, we know Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is number one, but Ibrahim is Khalilur Rahman. And who is he asking? God. يعني he's not asking a human being, he's asking Allah. And so they're having a conversation. And he says, show me. And Allah says, do you believe? يعني قال بلى أولم تؤمن قال بلى ولكن يطمئن قلبي. So that I feel more comfortable. So what does Allah say? Allah doesn't say, no, you can't ask a question. Who are you to ask a question? There's a red tape. You can't ask. You have to believe without blindly. No, He says, خُذْ أَرْبَعَةً مِنَ الطَّيْرِ. He gives him physical steps to gather evidence to show him how. To me, it's like, wow. That means you should never believe blindly. You should go and do experiments and gather evidence and use your mind to see the evidence, physical evidence, which is to me science. That's science. In telling me in the Quran how, if I want to seek a truth, how do I go seek the truth? So to me, this is a license, and that's why under Islam, under the Islamic civilization, this way of looking at the world, of how we use our minds and brains to look at the world, this framework came from Islam. So as a religion, it actually encouraged science, encouraged scientific inquiry. And that's why under the Islamic civilization, this mindset was adapted not just by Muslim scientists, it was a framework. You had Christian scientists, you had Jewish scientists, all under the Islamic civilization were pursuing science. And we see, and not just that, in Islam, if you find the right answer, you get 2 rewards, صح? And if you have the wrong answer, you get 1 reward. So either way, you're getting a reward, which is like beautiful. It's a license to keep asking. There's nothing to be scared of. And what matters is your intention. And who can evaluate your intention? Only Allah. So there's no judgment. So wow, what a license to go explore science and explore the world. And that's why, as an Islamic civilization, we made all these discoveries that are the basis of all the sciences we know today, from medicine to physics to astronomy to chemistry, to medicine, to even anthropology and sociology. All these all the Islamic civilization scientists set the basis for what we know today because of that understanding. So in a way, Islam as a religion actually was supportive of scientific inquiry. And even I'm going to mention this just because I want to prove the point. Even evolution, which a lot of people find controversial, but let's remember the old woman, young woman, okay? Even then, do you know that in the 7th century, Al-Jahid, Ikhwan al-Safa, Ibn Miskawayh, they all had theories similar to evolution. Way back. And that was okay. That was okay because it's all about asking questions and trying to find answers. And then even after Darwin came up with his evolution theory, you know there were scientists in the 1880s like Al-Jisr who actually agreed with him. So who disagreed actually? Who disagreed? I will tell you who disagreed. So in Islam, the role of humans is to use your knowledge, your intellectual curiosity to ask questions, okay? And then use the religion to guide us ethically what to do with our discoveries. For example, we discover stem cells. Can we use them or not? We discover the nuclear fission. How can we use it? And so on and so forth. So the Quran is a guide on how to live our lives. It's not a book where I'm going to find every scientific theory. But today, we see the stand of Muslims against a lot of issues in science controversial. And I'm asked a lot why. Because to me, Islam encouraged science, as I explained right now. And I think when we stopped understanding Islam in the way I described it, it's when we stopped becoming scientists and inquirers and curious. However, in Christianity, at least just to be fair, I'm talking about a certain kind of Christianity, now not all Christianity, they were against science. And we know the stories, we know the history. Galileo, Darwin, many, many others. And we know, according to the Western civilization, that when they had religion, their religion, science did not advance. That was the Dark Ages, right? And it's only when they left science, when they left religion, their religion, what happened? They started advancing in science. Nahna was the opposite. Religion encouraged us to do science, and when we left our religion, we went backwards. You see the difference? And this is important to remember. And to understand and to study. What is it in Islam that's different from Christianity that allowed us to flourish when we understood it and that allowed Christianity not to? All right, so there's different frameworks. And those are things we need to study. And that's why we need philosophers and we need social scientists to go study these things and to help us understand what is the right mindset to explore science that can help us have an ethical value system while being scientific and inquiring. And that's why Islam is all about celebration of plurality, meaning diversity, which is very similar to nature. We survive as a species because we're all so different. If we were all the same, we would all die. Because if a virus comes like the coronavirus and we're all the same, we would all die. But because we're all different, we respond differently. Some will do better, some will do worse, but some of us will survive. And that's the diversity. And that's why in Islam, it reflects the same kind of mindset, the same framework, that in Islam we celebrate diversity. And in the end, it's what you think is right, and only Allah will judge you. So because of that, I study other animals to try to understand the biology. So I study octopus. You know why? Because octopus are very highly advanced animals. They're very smart, by the way. They're the second, we're very smart, yeah, but octopuses are also very, very, very smart. And they interact with their environment in a very, very intelligent way. And socially, they interact with other members of their species in a very intelligent way. So the question is, what is different between humans and octopus? And how did octopus evolve versus humans? And of course, I'm interested in epigenetics. So I want to understand, how do octopus respond to the environment? As humans, we respond, we have changes on our DNA. And we know that it transfers across generations. How about octopus? Well, we found out that octopus respond to their environment much faster than humans, much faster. When we respond in changes in our DNA, it takes time. In octopus, it responds later, not at the level of the DNA, but at the level of messenger RNA. So they're much faster in their responses. And that's why we came up with a new framework, a new paradigm shift in how we look at trauma that's rooted in evolutionary biology, learning from octopus and reflecting it on humans. All right? And I'll end here with this hypothesis that this is emerging, that we don't look at changes as turning on or off a gene, meaning bad or good. No. It's about becoming more flexible or less flexible. So let me give you an example, like for childhood learning. Some kids, we call them orchids, meaning if they're exposed to something, whatever it is, positive or negative, they are like orchids. You know orchids? They're very sensitive. You have to take care of them. So if they're exposed to something positive, they're very sensitive. And if they're exposed to something negative, they're very sensitive. So it's not about better or worse, it's about sensitive. And then you have kids who are more like weeds, meaning wherever they grow, they grow. So it's not about positive, negative. It's about they're more, less sensitive. They can grow anywhere. Nothing affects them. And then most kids are in the middle, so we call them tulips. So when I say genes are turning on and off, it's not about a gene that's bad, I turned it off, and a gene that's good, I turned it on, and so on. It's about being more flexible or less flexible as I interact with the environment. So that's actually very positive, because that means I can play with my response to the environment, and I have more control over it. Then, khalas, I'm predestined, this is how I am, and I can't change a thing. Okay? And that's very positive instead of negative in the sense of how I respond and how I have responsibility on my actions to do good. Okay, so this is a new theory we're working on and we're trying to change. And why? Because we want to move people from being victims and feeling, oh my God, everything's bad, and blaming others, to taking responsibility and having agency and being more positive and saying, no, I can take responsibility. I can make a difference in my life. I don't have to wait for someone to save me, because this is a very kind of the Western attitude. I want to come and save you because into masakin, I want to save you, which is the reason they come and take all our everything. And no, I don't need saving. I can save myself. And this impacts everything in your society. It impacts the politics, it impacts the funding, it impacts programming, it impacts even your own life trajectory going forward. So this is kind of a new theory we're giving to the world. So with that, I'm going to end by acknowledging my scientist colleagues in Palestine, because I'm here and we're privileged that we have the freedom to talk, we have the freedom to practice and to do our science and to make discoveries. My female Palestinian scientists and male scientists, they don't. So I have been trying to bring their voices to the world. So I actually take their stories and write about them in Nature so the world knows about them, because this is our responsibility to give them a voice. As one of them told me, Rana, tell the world what's happening and be our voice to the world. So wherever I am, in any university, in any talk, I talk about them. And we actually created a list of all the academics who have been killed in Gaza. And one of them is Professor Khitam al-Wasfi. And we have a social media about them, remembering the Palestinian academics of Palestine. And I end with Einstein, because I'm in Germany. And I say, the world will not be destroyed by those who do evil, but by those who watch them without doing anything. Thank you. Jazakum Allahu khairan. And just to remind you, nobody's DNA is like anyone else, by the way, that ever lived, that lives today, that will ever live in the future. Everyone is unique. Even twins, identical twins, are different because of epigenetics. So because you're different, you have something to give to the world. So think, what is that thing that bothers you, and try to do something about it. And if somebody tells you you're only a drop in the ocean, what do you tell them? The ocean is millions of drops. It's all about us working together. And write your stories, please. Every one of you is special. You have your own life, what's happening with you, the challenges you face, the successes you make. Write them. Then we want the future generation to read about you from your words, your voice. If somebody else is going to write your story, we don't know what they're going to write about. We don't trust them. But you should write it for yourself and the future generation. So they have role models who look like them, who talk like them, who speak like them. And the last thing is the chaos theory. This is my motto. This is in physics. It says when a butterfly flutters its wings, it moves the wind 1 centimeter, but the result is a hurricane beyond time and space you can imagine, which is hadith Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. لا تحقرن من المعروف شيئا. So we only have to try. We are responsible to try. The result is on Allah. But we must not give up and say, oh, I'm just one person, I'm not going to try. Try, and that's all what matters. And this is my email, and now I'm ready for more questions. So any more questions? Please, yes.
How does Islam tackle the theory of evolution?
So I was told...
And how should we tackle this and discuss this with our children? Because they are in school, they are taught that we come from maybe from fishes or from monkeys. So how can we, from a Muslim perspective, tackle it?
Okay, so I'll take that question, but that will take me time to respond. I will explain the whole thing for those who are interested, but can I first take other questions and then I'll come back to that one. But just in case anybody goes, we don't come from fish. We don't come from monkeys. We all organisms have a common ancestor, okay? But that's different from saying we come from monkeys and we come from fish, just to make sure because of that sentence. But let's take other questions and I'll come back to that. Yes?
First of all, thank you very much for this very insightful lecture and the impactful work you're doing. I wanted to ask which variables were changed from the women's empowerment for Jordan and Syrian women? Because you said that for the first questionnaire was very Western based, but the second was more based on the culture in Jordan or Syria. So I would like to know what the different perception of empowerment was.
Okay, so the first one was a very generic, what is empower, like how, and you can look it up from our paper. Now, when we went in and asked them, the second paper just talks about how they defined empowerment. We didn't yet take that and create a tool that we can measure quantitatively, right? That's still coming. But if you look at the second paper that talks about how they defined empowerment, that's in the paper. And so they divide it into financial empowerment, psychological empowerment, cultural empowerment. And then what are the factors from your husband to the community, to money, to education. So it's very complicated and cannot be reduced to a few questions. And that's what we want to try to kind of deduce a questionnaire from it. But that will take time because any questionnaire has to be validated, tested, a number of times until you make sure it's the right one. So the first step is to explain it in all its complexity, which that paper will be coming out soon, inshallah. There was another question. Yes.
I had a question regarding cortisol. Because you said the concept of trauma is Western-based and the concept of empowerment is also Western-based. But how is then cortisol level measured when the measurements are also generally used on Western audiences or Western people? And how do we know that if it reaches one number, that this is normal for them, but it would be maybe considered problematic for people who have gone through massive other.
Yeah, so I'm not saying that cortisol is not an indicator of trauma, okay? I'm saying cortisol is an indicator of stress for anyone, okay? What I'm saying, when I say I want to look at it in a positive framework, meaning how I deal with the trauma. What do I do in response to the trauma? And when I, as a scientist, study a person who was going through trauma, how I perceive that person, how I interpret the results in a positive rather than a negative term, giving it the flexibility of change rather than deterministic, that this is you and you're negative. That has nothing to do with the cortisol. The cortisol is going to be high, it's high. It's an evolutionary response, regardless where you come from. You will have a high cortisol if you're exposed to trauma, okay? That will not change. It's how I interpret it. What do I do with it is how we perceive it. Does that help? And we're still working it out, but that's the idea. You're welcome. Other questions? Oh, please. I can't see whose hand. Yeah, sorry.
Could you please tell us more about how women saw or defined resilience and leadership? Because at some point in the lecture, you gave an example for when you studied women who are having a role in their societies reading for children, and you said you measured the resilience or leadership. I can't remember that exactly. And you said the result showed that they did not, but it was because it was designed to different standards.
Yeah, so there's so many things to measure, right, in these women who do we love reading. So we started off by looking at empowerment, well-being, and life satisfaction. Okay? We assumed the hypothesis was all three would improve because we have all the stories, the anecdotal evidence that shows that they did. Only life satisfaction showed improvement using quantitative surveys. And that's when we went back and did the fuzzy cognitive mapping to try to understand what are those concepts in the minds of those women. But there's another research that we just got accepted for publication where we looked at leadership and we looked at self-confidence. Self-confidence, leadership, and motivation to lead. And we saw in all those three there was improvement. So there's so many concepts one can look at, but fundamentally the theory of change that we are trying to come up with is that as a woman or man, but we just chose women because we have so many women. When I'm reading aloud to the children, okay, first of all the children and their families look at me as a leader. This helps me feel confident, self-confidence. It helps me, and therefore I think, oh my God, I'm important. And this gives me a motivation to lead, right? So I become, I'm a leader. If I can do this, what else can I do? And so we're trying to take each one alone and measure it so that we can prove our theory of change. So that paper, the one about well-being, life satisfaction, is already published. You can actually find it if you Google my name and put it in. The other one will be coming out, inshallah, in the next few months about the motivation to lead, the self-confidence, and all that. So it's bits and pieces, because when you do it scientifically, you can't do them all. You have to take one, prove it, and then you take another, and you prove it, and then a third, and you prove it, and so on. And you learn on the way. You're welcome. Any other questions? Yes?
At the very beginning, you mentioned something, with regards to the definition of trauma, like being, it's not like a single event, rather than it's a continuous event. So what about like the studies of post-traumatic stress disorders? We're still like being relevant to the studies of trauma, and how, you accurately would you define trauma as?
Yeah, so again, first of all, trauma means many things. We have to define what kind of trauma. Are we talking about trauma of war, displacement, physical abuse, domestic abuse, verbal abuse? There are so many definitions. So that's first. Now, when you talk about post-traumatic syndrome, to me, the only time that works if you have an actual event, and then you can see what happens after. But Palestinian refugees, how can you say there's one event? It's multiple events. And the whole framework of how to assess it is not right. It's missing so much. When you, it's when they left Palestine. Okay, but leaving itself, going to another place, that's another trauma, and then another trauma. So where do you stop and say, this is the post-trauma, and now it's a new trauma? Again, this whole framework of looking at individual events is a very modernistic approach of science, which is very siloed, like chemistry, physics, math, biology. When we know now that you cannot study one without the other, they're all connected. And when we look at nature, you can't study something without looking at everything. So now slowly science is moving from this very siloed discipline kind of approach to a more interdisciplinary, connected, more fluid kind of approach, which is now starting to happen. And this will challenge a lot of the old research. So it doesn't mean that research is not useful. It is, but we need to take it with a grain of salt and think, wait a minute, there's more to the story if we really understand it. And I presume in the past we had to divide things to make it simple to study, but now it's not helping anymore. We're hitting walls. So we need to take out that framework and put in a more fluid framework of understanding so we can go further in our understanding of nature. Does that explain? Yeah.
Makes sense,
Yeah. Inshallah. Other questions? Oh, yes, in the back and then here. Yeah.
My question might be slightly related to the first one. And what I would like to know is, we know that the Adhan is the first human being that Allah sent. But on the other hand, we have the concept of, let's say, gentleman, then Homo sapien, and then Neanderthal, whatever you say. Then you also found that scaling down of 150,000, 200,000 years ago in Africa. So putting all this thing together, based on the current research, how does it translate to the actual origin of the Prophet?
Okay, I'm going to tackle that one. But again, disclaimer. Are we ready to listen to things that we may not agree with? Okay?
And also, I'd like to know, what's your, based on the scientific evidence?
Yeah.
And your knowledge, how do you think?
How do I, bring them together? Okay. Was there a last question there? There was someone in the back. Do you want to ask so I can answer this question?
Yeah. First of all, thank you for this interesting presentation. And like from your professional opinion and experience, what do you think about therapy? Like, is it a first step to heal this generational trauma? Like, just talking and because, like, for example, what's happening now in Palestine, I don't think that any therapist is ready to like have this talk with someone.
Yeah.
So, like, therapy, is it something that works?
So, okay, first of all, I'm a basic biologist, all right? I'm not a mental health expert. I'm not an anthropologist. I'm not a psychologist. I work biology. But I've learned about these things to help understand the basic biology. So my answer to you is, what's happening now is a trauma that's ongoing. How do you heal it? Of course, talking about it helps. What are the traditional ways of therapy that science has come up with? I'm sure will be helpful. Are they the last or the best? We don't know. We still have to keep exploring and talking. But we also need to learn from other traditions, right? For example, we don't look at religion as a tool to help in therapy. Okay, mental health therapy. We don't. The WHO does not talk about religion, unfortunately. Although religion is part of everyday life, and that's how we help each other. So what we can do is to look at other ways of healing trauma, of therapy that we have inherited from other wisdoms, ancient wisdoms, Islam, other religions, whatever, and learn from them how we can deal with trauma coming forward. We wrote a paper about that recently. Come on, if you Google, I talked about religion and COVID. Like, why can't we use religion as a reason to tell people that this is how you deal with COVID? And WHO said, no, we can't talk about religion. Why can't you talk about religion? Oh, you have a problem with religion, but I don't have a problem with religion. So we need more people to talk about it. But of course, to do it scientifically. And we're not taking everything in religion, whether we agree or disagree, but to use it, to learn from it. So this is something we're talking. Actually, I gave a talk about in the refugees and Syrian refugees, for example, because it was the big thing in Jordan. All the international NGOs came into Jordan with all the programs you can think in the world. They even suggested for the refugees to learn Brazilian dancing to help them deal with trauma. And I said, Shuhad, what is this? Like, why? I mean, I have my religion. I can go pray. I can, I don't know, there's a million other ways. Why that one? They're so afraid of religion because they have a problem. But we don't. So but we have to have the courage and the scientific mind to say, wait a minute, we can use it. And this is how we use it. But we have to have confidence and speak about it and interrogate it. Okay? Yeah, we're good. Okay, so about evolution. Last time I talked about evolution, I was encouraged not to talk, but you asked me 2 questions and I have to answer, so I'm going to answer. And this is me. First of all, disclaimer. Big disclaimer. I am not a scholar of religion, okay? I'm not. And I don't speak for the Muslims of the world. I speak as Rana. I'm a Muslim and I'm a scientist. I can talk about science. I have that scholarship. So I will speak and share how Rana, as a scientist, understands evolution as a Muslim, okay? Now, you're free. You want to take it, you don't want to take it, you want to throw it away, it's up to you. Back to Islam. Islam says, everybody between him and Allah. وَإِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Right? And that's what's so beautiful about Islam. So, this is my way of understanding. First, I have to explain what is evolution. Because most people who talk about evolution have never, I ask you, have you ever read The Origin of the Species by Darwin? Has anyone read it? No. Islam tells us you shouldn't talk about something before you read the resource. And we don't. We hear, Aniflan, what he said. You should go and read by yourself. This is number 1. So that's my first challenge. Before anybody says something is wrong, go read it. So just to give you a little background, what is evolution? From a scientist, from a biology perspective, has nothing to do with religion. What is evolution? And then we will talk about what does it mean in terms of being a Muslim. So just to give you a small example, imagine you have a field of trees, olive trees. I'm نحكي عن فلسطين. Olive trees. Are those olive trees identical, do you think? No. They're similar enough to call them olive trees, but they're slightly different a little bit. Just like humans, right? We're all human. We know we're humans, but we're slightly different. So this field of olive trees is living or growing. Suddenly there's a change in the environment. Climate change. It becomes very, very hot. So some of the trees cannot live in the heat, but some can because they're different. So some trees will die and some trees will live. Those that live because they have a gene that lets them live. And those trees that live, that have the gene that helps them live in a high temperature. Adhan. Okay. Suspense. We stop. Shall I continue and then you receive? Okay, quick. So the olive trees, back to the olive trees, some of them died, some of them survived. Those that survived grew and had seeds, and the seeds created the next generation. So the next generation of trees all can live in a high temperature. Good? After a few generations, there is a drought, no rain. So some of the trees will die, some of them will survive. Those that survive have a gene that can deal with the drought. So the next generation of trees has two genes, one for heat and one for drought. Then, after a few generations, now it's actually the opposite. It's very cold. So those trees that were resistant to heat actually died. Okay? And because they're all different, some of them will survive in the cold and will contribute to the next generation. So imagine millions of years. So what's going to happen to this population of trees? It's going to change a lot, especially if the environment is always changing, and millions of years, many millions of generations, the first group of trees is going to be very different from the last group of trees. This is evolution. Okay? So it's not directed. It depends on the environment, and it has to be genetic. This is evolution, this is natural selection, in the simplest form. So that's number one. Now, the second thing about evolution that we always confuse, evolution only explains how different species came to be. It does not talk or explain about how life started. That is not evolution. That's a question that we are all trying to answer. Muslim says it's Allah, non-Muslim says it's nature, wala power, everybody says who he wants. But evolution has nothing to do with that, doesn't talk about that question. So even Darwin, if you read his book, he says there's a power that started life. All right, so nobody's talking about life, about fi Allah wala ma fi Allah. That's not the question of evolution. So those are two separate things. So if I say evolution is the best way to explain how species came, that doesn't talk about who started it. Okay, so that's another important point that people think. Why people get that confused? I'll tell you why. Because today, evolution is the best explanation of how species came to be. Now, when Darwin came up with the theory, the Christian community, and not all Christian community, because they say some people agreed and some didn't, just to be fair, the Christian community that was against Darwin were against him because if his theory was correct, that means Earth has to be very old, to bring out the diversity, like billions of years. But according to the Bible, the Earth is 6,000 years. Either I believe the Bible is 6,000 years, or Darwin is correct. And if Darwin is correct, the Bible is wrong. And so they called him an atheist. We don't have a problem as Muslims because we say the earth is very long. So the problem of atheism was only a Christian problem, not our problem. That's why we had people who talked about evolution before Darwin and after Darwin, and we were okay. So it's not about atheism. It's only a problem with Christians. then the question is, why did it become a problem for Muslims? Since we already had scientists who talked about evolution before and after Darwin? Well, I'll tell you why. Because in the past 200 years, a number of things happened. First of all, the Western white supremacists used Darwin's theory to justify colonizing people. So they took his theory and used it in the wrong way. Just like you take the nuclear fission and use it to make a bomb. So they took Darwin's theory and said, so the white race is better than any other race. And this is wrong. This is not based on biology. This was their own way of using it in a wrong way. For we, the people who were colonized, we heard them say, Darwin is the reason we want to colonize you. So we thought, Allahu Akbar, يعني بديش أحكي كلمة كبيرة على Darwin. If he's the reason, then he's all wrong. Right? But they used him in the wrong way. And no wonder we were against him. Okay, so that's number one, because evolution was associated with colonization, imperialism, etc., etc., etc. Now we know that has nothing to do with him. The second reason is we didn't have our own scientists. Okay? And we thought if the Christian thinks he's wrong, then as Muslims, we're all people of the book, then he's wrong. But our own scientists then, before, al-Jisr, وغيره, they didn't have a problem. So we also had lack of science and knowledge. So that's the second thing. The 1 minute left?
No.
Oh.